Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we aren't just looking at history. We are stepping way back into the terrifying, totally unforgiving world of ancient prehistory. We're going to trace the sparks of humanity. Those massive physical and mental leaps that allowed our ancestors to not just survive, but eventually dominate the entire globe.
Seriously, how did a completely defenseless species conquer Earth? Just think about the human body for a second. Against the brutal forces of the ancient world, we were remarkably vulnerable. We didn't have thick hides, venom, sharp claws, or even the speed to outrun the massive predators of the time. We were just a soft, defenseless species dropped right into the middle of a ruthless food chain. So how on earth did we actually conquer it?
Well, to survive that Paleolithic struggle, our ancestors obviously couldn't rely on brute strength. They had to rely on observation, teamwork, and innovation. They literally had to engineer their way out of being prey. They used their minds to build a barrier between themselves and the terrifying wilderness around them.
To understand exactly how they did this, anthropologists break our timeline into three major stages of evolution. First, savagery, marked by fire and hunting. Then, barbarism, where we see agriculture and settlement. And finally, civilization, bringing metals and writing. Section 1. The physical sparks, fire and farming. Because before early humans could sit around pondering the universe, they absolutely had to secure their physical survival against freezing temperatures and starvation.
The very first technological breakthrough was almost certainly an accident. Early humans likely discovered fire completely by chance, maybe from a natural forest fire sparked by lightning, or just a lucky rock strike when they were making tools. But recognizing the power of that accidental spark, that changed absolutely everything.
Harnessing the flame wasn't just about getting warm in brutal climates. It actually catalyzed our very first industries. It cooked meat and tough roots, which unlocked massive amounts of calories for our growing brains. It also scared away nocturnal predators so our ancestors could actually get some safe sleep, and eventually it allowed us to bake clay into pottery to store food and water long term. Now, let's fast forward to a massive turning point, 12,000. That's about how many years ago the agricultural revolution began. Up until this exact moment, humans spent basically all their time just chasing food. But this shift fundamentally rewired human society forever.
The dawn of farming definitely didn't happen overnight. It started simply with gathering wild, naturally occurring grains. Then, over time, humans began observing seed growth. This eventually led to intentional planting and harvesting, and finally, establishing permanent settlements. We stopped wandering, and we started building villages.
Moving on to our next section, mastering the Earth, the Metal Ages. Having mastered plants and the surface of the Earth, humanity looked deeper, extracting raw elements to mold to their absolute will.
We often group the Bronze and Iron Ages together, but looking at bronze versus iron, the technological jump was massive. Bronze, which is an alloy of copper and tin, melts easily and shapes quickly. Iron, on the other hand, is a completely different beast. It demands extreme heat, complex extraction, and exhausting, repeated hammering. It was basically the high-tech of the ancient world.
And because iron was so incredibly hard to extract from the Earth, early humans actually got it from space. No, really. Early iron tools, like King Tutankhamun's famous meteoritic dagger found in his tomb, were literally forged from fallen meteorites. Because it literally fell from the sky and was so difficult to work with, iron actually terrified and mystified people. As the quote goes, iron was initially considered impure in ancient Egypt, known as the bone of Set, Set being the god of chaos and storms. It was this massive leap in technology met right away with mythological fear. Which brings us to the next section, the mental sparks controlling the unseen. As societies grew, we needed a psychological way to cope with the terrifying, unpredictable forces of nature. We really needed to feel like we could control the unseen. This deep desire for control gave birth to what we call sympathetic magic. Basically, it's the primitive belief that imitating an event or drawing it can magically cause it to happen in reality. This was early humanity's first, admittedly flawed, attempt at science. The logic made absolute sense to them. If you draw a successful hunt on a cave wall or imitate rain through a dance, you can magically force it to happen. They were trying to enforce order on a completely chaotic world.
But soon, a really fascinating division occurred. We see this split between magic versus deception. On one hand, you had sympathetic magic, which were genuine, albeit flawed, attempts by the masses to control nature and survive. On the other hand, you had deception and illusion. Early shamans and leaders realized that using tricks to create the illusion of magic gave them immense social power.
Yeah, ancient priests used literal magic tricks. Historical sources point to some incredible ancient illusions. We're talking about ventriloquism at the Oracle of Delphi to fake the voice of gods, hidden flammable drawings in temples that would suddenly ignite in the dark, or even feigned invulnerability to fire or poison. These were ancient special effects, designed purely to maintain awe and obedience.
And that leads right into our final section, the origins of belief, explaining the unexplainable. Because beyond magic tricks, humans needed a broader framework to explain massive natural phenomena.
Anthropologists track a very clear evolution of belief here. It started with a raw fear of natural elements like storms and floods. Then it evolved into animism, the belief that spirits lived in all things like trees and rivers. From there, it shifted upward to worshiping celestial bodies like the stars and the sun. And finally, it crystallized into polytheism, where those local forces were given faces and names as deities and gods.
When it came to appeasing the storm, early religious rituals really were born out of a desperate need for safety. Think about it. If a storm is just chaotic weather, you are totally helpless. But if it's a conscious being, well, then you can negotiate. So, rituals and sacrifices emerged as attempts to negotiate with those overwhelming forces of nature.
Just put yourself in their shoes for a second. As this quote puts it, to the primitive mind, the sun, rain, and storms were not weather, but conscious, independent powers. Without modern science, these forces could bless your harvest or literally destroy your entire village in a single afternoon. They absolutely demanded respect.
So from striking rocks to make fire, to forging meteorites, to creating complex belief systems to understand our world, we literally engineered our way out of the food chain. We took a soft, defenseless body and used our nines to tame the elements. Looking back at this incredible and honestly often accidental trajectory of our ancient past, we engineered our way out of the food chain and tamed the elements. What will be our next great leap?